It was a bright and freezing January morning in a quiet English town called Ashford. Frost covered the rooftops. The pavement sparkled under the pale winter sun, and people hurried along the high street wrapped in thick scarves and warm coats. 12-year-old Oliver Bennett adjusted the straps of his worn backpack as he walked beside his mother toward school. His breath formed little white clouds in the cold air, but a smile stayed on his face. Their family didn't have much money. Oliver's mother worked long hours at a local bakery, while his father repaired bicycles in a small workshop on the edge of town. Every pound they earned went toward rent, heating, and food. Buying new clothes wasn't easy. That winter, Oliver had received only one new thing, a navy blue winter coat. His parents had quietly saved money for nearly 4 months to buy it. His mother often smiled whenever she saw him wearing it. "It suits you perfectly," she always said. Oliver treasured it because he knew how hard his parents had worked to afford it. At school, lessons passed quickly. His best friend Ethan talked excitedly about the weekend football match, while everyone crowded around a classroom heater during break. The weather forecast predicted even colder temperatures for the following week. Teachers reminded every student to wear gloves and hats before walking home. When the final bell rang, children rushed outside. The afternoon sky remained clear. The winter sunshine made the streets look golden despite the cold. Oliver waved goodbye to Ethan before beginning the 20-minute walk home through the town center. Ashford Market Square was busy. Flower stalls stood beside bakeries. Office workers carried takeaway coffees. Parents pushed prams while elderly couples enjoyed slow afternoon walks. Near the entrance to the old library sat an elderly homeless man. Most people walked straight past him. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others pretended they hadn't noticed him. His beard was gray. His shoes were badly worn. His jumper looked far too thin for such freezing weather. He quietly rubbed his hands together, trying to stay warm. A small paper cup rested beside him. Only a few coins lay inside. Oliver slowed down. He had seen the man before, almost every afternoon. Yet today felt different. The man's hands trembled noticeably. His lips had turned pale from the cold. Oliver stopped several feet away. "Hello, sir." The man slowly looked up. His tired eyes softened. "Hello, young man." Oliver hesitated. "Are you all right?" The old man forced a weak smile. "I've had better days." Oliver looked around. People continued walking past, as though nothing unusual was happening. He felt uncomfortable, not because of the homeless man, because everyone else seemed unwilling to care. "My name's Oliver." "I'm Arthur." Arthur's voice remained calm despite the cold. "You should keep walking, Oliver. You'll be late getting home." Oliver glanced at Arthur's thin jumper again. "Aren't you freezing?" Arthur laughed quietly. "I won't lie. I certainly am. But spring always comes eventually." The answer surprised Oliver. Even while shivering, Arthur managed to smile. Oliver opened his backpack. Inside sat the packed lunch he hadn't finished. A cheese sandwich, an apple, a chocolate biscuit. He offered them to Arthur. "I didn't eat these." Arthur looked at the food, then back at Oliver. "You don't have to do that." "I want to." Arthur accepted them slowly. "Thank you." He carefully unwrapped the sandwich, as though it were the finest meal he'd ever seen. Oliver smiled. Watching someone genuinely grateful felt strangely comforting. As Oliver prepared to leave, a sharp gust of icy wind swept through the square. Arthur shivered violently. Oliver instinctively zipped his own coat higher. Then he paused. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "We saved a long time for that coat." He knew how precious it was. Without it, walking home would be painfully cold. His parents would surely ask questions. He stared at Arthur again. The elderly man wrapped his arms around himself. It looked impossible for him to stay warm. Oliver's heart raced. He quietly unzipped his own coat. Arthur noticed immediately. "No." Oliver smiled gently. "You need it more." Arthur shook his head. "I couldn't possibly. My parents always tell me that kindness only matters when it costs something." Arthur stared silently. Oliver removed the coat completely. Cold air immediately surrounded him. He placed it over Arthur's shoulders. The oversized coat covered the elderly man's trembling body. Arthur looked stunned. "I can't accept this." "You already have." Oliver laughed. It looks better on you. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Arthur's eyes filled with tears. Not loud sobbing, just quiet emotion, the kind that comes after years of feeling invisible. People passing by slowed briefly. Some looked surprised. Others smiled. One woman discreetly wiped away a tear before continuing toward the station. Arthur reached inside the coat pocket. He pulled out a small silver button that had become loose. "It seems your mother stitched this herself." Oliver nodded proudly. "She fixes everything." Arthur carefully held the button. "She raised a remarkable young man." Oliver felt embarrassed. "I'm just trying to help." Arthur stood slowly. Although still tired, he seemed somehow stronger, warmer, hopeful. "You've given me far more than a coat today." Oliver looked confused. "What do you mean?" Arthur smiled. "You reminded me that goodness still exists." Those words stayed with Oliver long after he walked away. The journey home felt freezing. His jumper wasn't enough against the bitter wind. He rubbed his hands together repeatedly. Every step seemed colder. Yet something inside him felt unusually warm. He couldn't explain it. When he finally opened the front door, his mother immediately noticed. "Oliver." She looked around. "Where's your coat?" Oliver froze. He hadn't prepared an answer. His father stepped out from the kitchen, carrying a mug of tea. He also noticed immediately. Did someone steal it? Oliver slowly shook his head. No. His mother knelt beside him. "What happened?" Oliver took a deep breath. "I gave it away." Silence filled the house. His father frowned. "You gave away the coat?" Oliver nodded. There was an elderly homeless man outside the library. He looked like he might freeze. "I couldn't leave him there." His parents exchanged glances. Neither spoke for several seconds. Oliver felt certain he was about to be punished. After all, they had worked so hard to buy that coat. Instead, his mother quietly hugged him, very tightly. She whispered, "I'm proud of you." Oliver blinked. "You aren't angry?" She smiled through watery eyes. "We can always earn more money." "We can't buy a kind heart." His father nodded. "Tomorrow we'll find another way to keep you warm." That evening the family searched through old boxes in the attic. Eventually they found an old brown jacket that had belonged to Oliver's older cousin years earlier. It wasn't fashionable. It wasn't thick, but it fit. His mother repaired the torn sleeves while his father replaced a broken zip. By bedtime it looked almost new. Oliver thanked them both. Over the following weeks, Oliver continued seeing Arthur in the market square. Now Arthur wore the navy blue coat every day. Whenever Oliver walked past, they chatted for a few minutes. Arthur never begged. Instead, he told stories. Stories about history, books, old buildings, music, life. Oliver discovered Arthur was incredibly educated. His vocabulary amazed him. Sometimes Arthur quoted famous writers from memory. Other times he explained fascinating historical events. Oliver listened carefully every afternoon. One sunny Saturday, Oliver asked, "Were you always homeless?" Arthur became quiet. "No." "What happened?" Arthur smiled gently. "Everyone carries chapters they don't read aloud." Oliver respected the answer. He didn't ask again. Months passed. Spring slowly replaced winter. Flowers appeared in parks. The heavy coats disappeared. One afternoon, Oliver reached Arthur's usual bench. It was empty. He looked around. Nothing. The next day, still empty. The market florist shrugged. "I haven't seen him for days." The cafe owner said the same thing. Arthur had simply vanished. Oliver felt strangely disappointed. He had never learned where Arthur went, or whether he was safe. Life gradually became busy again. School exams arrived. Football matches filled weekends. Years rolled forward. Childhood quietly faded into adulthood. Yet one memory remained crystal clear. A freezing winter afternoon. A navy blue coat. An elderly stranger who had smiled through tears. Oliver never imagined that 10 years later, on another bright winter afternoon, a single unexpected meeting would completely change both of their lives. 10 years passed. Ashford had changed. New cafes lined the high street. The old library had been renovated. Young families filled the parks, and the market square looked brighter than Oliver remembered. At 22, Oliver Bennett no longer wore second-hand jackets. He had worked incredibly hard. After earning excellent grades, he received a scholarship to study architecture in London. Now he had returned to Ashford for a job interview with a respected development company that planned to restore several historic buildings in the town center. As he stepped off the train on a crisp winter morning, memories flooded back. The bakery where his mother still worked, the bicycle workshop his father still owned, and the market square where he had once given away his coat. Oliver walked through town carrying a leather portfolio. He looked confident, but inside he was nervous. This interview could change his career. As he crossed the square, he glanced toward the old library. For a moment, he remembered Arthur sitting there, shivering in the cold. He smiled faintly. I wonder what happened to him. The interview took place inside a restored Victorian building overlooking the town. 3 executives asked detailed questions about design, preservation, and community projects. Oliver answered carefully. He spoke about creating spaces that made people feel welcome rather than merely impressed. One interviewer, a distinguished silver-haired man, listened with unusual interest. He said very little. He simply watched Oliver. After nearly an hour, the interview ended. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," one executive said. "We'll be in touch soon." Oliver shook hands and left the room. He felt uncertain. Some answers had gone well. Others, perhaps not. Instead of going home immediately, he decided to walk through town. The winter sun was bright, though the air remained cold. Children played near the fountain. Street musicians performed outside the shopping arcade. Everything felt familiar and different at the same time. As Oliver approached a small independent bookshop, someone spoke behind him. "Excuse me, young man." The voice stopped him instantly. Something about it felt familiar. He turned. An elderly gentleman stood beside a dark green car. He wore an elegant wool coat, polished shoes, and a flat cap. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and his eyes carried a warmth Oliver had seen once before. The man smiled. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Oliver stared for several seconds. Then his eyes widened. "Arthur?" The elderly man laughed softly. "In the flesh." Oliver could hardly believe it. This well-dressed gentleman looked nothing like the homeless man from 10 years ago. I thought I'd never see you again." "So did I," Arthur replied. They shook hands, but Arthur immediately pulled Oliver into a warm hug. "You've grown into a fine man." They walked to a nearby cafe and sat by the window. Sunlight streamed across the table. For several minutes, they simply smiled in disbelief. "What happened to you?" Oliver finally asked. Arthur stirred his tea thoughtfully. "The short version? After we met, I decided I didn't want to disappear. Your kindness embarrassed me in the best possible way. I realized I'd spent years believing no one cared whether I existed. Then a 12-year-old boy gave away his only winter coat. Arthur explained that a local charity worker had noticed the coat and stopped to speak with him. That conversation led to temporary housing, then counseling, then part-time work. Slowly, his life began to rebuild. It wasn't easy, Arthur admitted, but that day became my turning point. Oliver smiled. "I'm glad." Arthur looked at him carefully. "Do you know what I remember most?" "Not the coat." "You looked me in the eye." Most people looked through me. Oliver felt a lump in his throat. They talked for over an hour. Arthur asked about university, Oliver's parents, and his career plans. When Oliver mentioned the architecture interview, Arthur's expression became difficult to read. "The company restoring the historic district?" "Yes." "Interesting." "Why?" Arthur smiled. "No reason." As they left the cafe, Arthur said, "I have something to show you." He drove Oliver to a large brick building near the river. Above the entrance was a sign, "The Harbor House, Community Center and Transitional Housing." People entered and left carrying books, groceries, and children's artwork. The building felt alive. Inside, volunteers served lunch while children attended an after-school program. Arthur greeted nearly everyone by name. "You work here?" Oliver asked. "I help run it." Arthur showed him classrooms, counseling rooms, and temporary flats for families struggling financially. Everything was clean, bright, and welcoming. "This place is incredible," Oliver said. Arthur nodded. It exists because someone once reminded me that dignity matters. In the final office, Arthur opened a drawer and carefully removed a familiar navy blue coat. Oliver froze. You kept it? Every year. The coat was old now, but beautifully preserved. Arthur held it with obvious emotion. Whenever I wanted to give up, I looked at this. It reminded me that my life still had value. Oliver felt overwhelmed. He had always thought the coat was a small act. Now he realized it had become part of someone's survival story. Arthur smiled. There's one more thing you should know. He reached for a framed photograph on the shelf. It showed several people standing in front of the harbor house during its opening ceremony. Among them was Arthur, and standing beside him, Oliver's eyes widened. The silver-haired executive from the interview. Wait! Arthur nodded. He's the chairman of the development company. And an old friend of mine. Oliver stared at him in shock. Did you arrange my interview? No. Arthur's answer came immediately. I didn't even know you were applying until today. He smiled gently. But life does have a strange sense of timing. Before Oliver could respond, his phone rang. An unknown number. He answered. Mr. Bennett? It was a development company. We'd like you to come back tomorrow morning. The chairman would like a second conversation with you personally. Oliver looked at Arthur. Arthur simply smiled. Whatever happens, he said, remember this. The smallest act of kindness can travel farther than you ever see. Oliver nodded slowly, but he still had no idea that the real twist in Arthur's story had not yet been revealed, and tomorrow's meeting would uncover a truth that connected their lives long before that winter afternoon in Ashford. The following morning was bright and cold. The winter sunshine reflected from the windows of the old Victorian building, where Oliver's second meeting was scheduled. He arrived 15 minutes early. Despite everything Arthur had told him the day before, Oliver still believed this meeting would be like any other interview. He had no idea that his entire understanding of the past was about to change. A receptionist welcomed him with a smile. Good morning, Mr. Bennett. The chairman is expecting you. Oliver followed her upstairs. Instead of entering the large conference room from yesterday, she led him into a smaller office overlooking Ashford Market Square. The view stretched across the very place where 10 years earlier a 12-year-old boy had stopped to help a freezing stranger. Oliver couldn't help staring out of the window. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. It's a wonderful view, isn't it? Oliver turned. The silver-haired chairman entered with an easy smile. Please have a seat. They shook hands. My name is Richard Lawson. Oliver sat opposite him. Richard poured 2 cups of tea before speaking. I've heard something remarkable about you. Oliver assumed Arthur had told him about the coat. He smiled modestly. It wasn't really remarkable. Richard smiled. That's exactly what someone remarkable usually says. Richard placed a folder on the desk. Inside were Oliver's university records, his architectural designs, letters from professors, volunteer work. Everything was excellent. You've earned every achievement yourself, Richard said. No one has given you anything. Oliver thanked him. Then Richard leaned back. But there's another reason I wanted this meeting. Oliver listened carefully. Richard walked toward the window. 10 years ago, Arthur wasn't simply a homeless man. Oliver frowned. What do you mean? Richard looked across the market square. He had once been one of Britain's finest structural engineers. Oliver stared in surprise. He helped design bridges, hospitals, railway stations, and historic restorations. He was brilliant. Richard continued quietly. We worked together for almost 20 years. Arthur was respected across the country. So what happened? Richard sighed. Life. Years earlier, Arthur had lost his wife after a long illness. A year later, his daughter moved abroad. Then the engineering company he helped build collapsed during an economic crisis. Arthur blamed himself for everything. He slowly withdrew from friends. He stopped answering letters. Eventually, he lost his home, not because he lacked intelligence, but because grief convinced him he no longer mattered. Oliver lowered his eyes. So, all those stories he told me were real? Richard nodded. He never exaggerated. He simply stopped believing he deserved another chance. Richard smiled gently, until one little boy gave him one. Oliver felt emotional. I only gave him a coat. Richard shook his head. No, you gave him dignity. There's a difference. Richard opened another folder. Inside were photographs. Arthur helping children with homework. Arthur planting community gardens. Arthur teaching apprentices. Arthur opening the harbor house. Arthur laughing with families. Richard spread them across the desk. One act of kindness created this. Oliver stared silently. Richard smiled. Arthur often says something. He says the warmest coat he ever received wasn't made of wool. It was made of compassion. Just then there was a gentle knock. Arthur entered carrying a small wooden box. He smiled. I hope I'm not interrupting. Richard laughed. Perfect timing. Arthur sat beside Oliver. I owe you one final story. Arthur placed a wooden box on the desk. Inside lay the small silver button that had come loose from Oliver's coat 10 years ago. Arthur had kept it all this time. I wanted to return this. Oliver picked it up carefully. I thought it was lost. Arthur smiled. I kept it to remind myself that broken things can be repaired. For several moments, nobody spoke. Sunlight filled the office. Outside, families crossed the square exactly as they had years earlier. Life continued. Arthur broke the silence. Do you remember asking why I became homeless? Oliver nodded. You said everyone carries chapters they don't read aloud. Arthur smiled. I think it's finally time to read mine. Arthur explained that after rebuilding his life, he made himself a promise. If he ever stood on his own feet again, he would spend the rest of his life helping people who felt invisible. That promise became the Harbor House. Hundreds of people had already found housing, employment, and counseling there. Many had reunited with family. Some had started businesses. Others had returned to university. Every success reminded Arthur of one freezing afternoon. Oliver smiled. You've helped far more people than I ever did. Arthur shook his head immediately. No, you lit the first candle. I simply carried the flame. Richard stood. I believe this conversation leads naturally to today's decision. Oliver looked confused. Richard smiled warmly. The board has unanimously agreed. We would like to offer you the position. Oliver blinked. Really? You'll become our youngest heritage restoration architect. Oliver could hardly believe it. This is incredible. Richard wasn't finished. Our first project is actually across the street. Oliver looked out the window. The old library. The same library? Oliver asked. Richard nodded. We're transforming it into a larger learning center connected directly to the Harbor House. Arthur smiled proudly. We want every child to feel welcome. Oliver immediately accepted. I'd be honored. Over the following months, Oliver poured his heart into the project. He designed bright reading rooms, accessible entrances, community spaces, warm gathering areas for families. Every detail reflected something Arthur had taught him years before. Buildings should make people feel they belonged. When the center officially opened, hundreds of residents attended. Children laughed. Parents explored the new library. Volunteers welcomed visitors. Reporters covered the event. But none of them knew the true beginning of the story. It hadn't started with architects, or business leaders, or charities. It had started with a 12-year-old boy who simply couldn't walk past someone in need. During the ceremony, Arthur was invited to speak. He stood at the podium. His voice remained calm. I've been asked many times how this place began. People assume it started with funding, or planning, or generous donors. He smiled toward Oliver. They're wrong. It started with kindness. Real kindness asks for nothing in return. It doesn't wait until someone deserves help. It simply acts. The audience applauded. Arthur then surprised everyone. He invited Oliver onto the stage. The young architect looked embarrassed. Arthur placed the old navy blue coat across Oliver's shoulders. It no longer fit. Everyone laughed warmly. Arthur smiled. 10 years ago, this coat kept me alive. Today, it belongs where its story began. Oliver carefully hugged Arthur. Many people in the audience wiped away tears. Months later, the restored learning center became one of Ashford's proudest landmarks. Children borrowed thousands of books. Families attended workshops. Job seekers found training. People who had once felt forgotten found hope. Above the entrance, a small bronze plaque carried a simple message. One act of kindness can warm generations. No names, no recognition, just a reminder. Years later, school groups often visited the building. Teachers would point toward the plaque and ask students what they thought it meant. Every child had a different answer, but one little girl smiled and said, "I think it means you should never think a small good deed is too small." Arthur and Oliver happened to be walking past at that very moment. They looked at each other and smiled. Neither corrected her, because she was absolutely right. Life would continue bringing challenges. There would be difficult days, unexpected setbacks, moments of uncertainty. But both men now understood one truth that never changed. Kindness never disappears. Sometimes it travels quietly through years. Sometimes it changes one life. Sometimes it changes hundreds. And sometimes it comes back to the person who gave it, not as a reward, but as proof that compassion can echo far beyond anything we can imagine.